Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This is Richard Harris over here at Sales Hacker. We kind of switched up our systems this week, so there was not this audio of, hey, you are now officially on. So, but I know we are now. So thank you so much for joining us. We're super, super excited. Obviously, before we jump into everything, we have sort of our traditional housekeeping stuff. One, yes, this is being recorded, so by all means, if you can't attend the whole thing, you want to come back and listen, please look for it in our archives. Two, I want to make sure that you know that please ask questions as we go through this process. It is far more interesting and a compelling conversation when you have everybody in the group joining us and asking great questions. And three, to sort of introduce our leader today, it was Joshua Tillman. He also goes by Josh, so feel free to address him in either way. I'll be monitoring the question and answer box as well as the chat feature, so feel free to put those Q&As in there as we go through this. But Joshua, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to have you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Richard. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise. We are too. I know we had a good time talking about this and what DialSource sort of does for everybody. So, again, this is one of those conversations where I've said before is the pre-planning of these meetings are as equally exciting as the actual meeting itself. So Josh, sort of walk us through and let's get rolling on this thing. I got to find my first document now that everything's originally out of whack. But talk to me a little bit, Josh, about what are we talking about today as we talk about the sales stack, right? We hear this all the time that the sales stack is overcrowded, and to a certain degree, I think the sales stack is dead. It's now a total stack, right? Sales, marketing, ops, even customer success, right? You can't sort of make these decisions so much in the binary world. But tell us what even got us to this point. What have you seen that brought you here?
Well, yeah, it's a complicated topic, and it's one that's talked about often, especially in sophisticated organizations that are using variation of tools and technologies to increase the rep's output. And at DialSource, we've been really working on helping to solve this problem over the last decade and a half, and so we've seen a lot of technology evolve over that process. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of organizations find themselves in today is that even with the greatest intent by the executives and the managers to enable their reps to be as productive as possible and gain as much insight from reporting, we've constantly added more tools and technology into that total stack, as you mentioned. And so that creates a very disparate system where our sales and service reps become the administrators of each of these web portals and integrations and technologies making up the stack, and it becomes a cumbersome process for the sales and service rep to be the management or administrator of the system in order to achieve their quotas, their service numbers, etc., which takes time and energy away from the rep in doing what their prime responsibility is. And so this is a topic, I think, that a lot of people, whether they are BDRs, account executives, or work their way up to CEO level, have at one point or another touched this problem to varying degrees over the last 10 years, in which CRM and the technology has really grown.
Yep. It's so much, the technology has outgrown us so much so that I think we just, everybody sort of wants a plug and play, right? Everything should be plug and play, when in fact it's a little more nuanced than that these days, right? What you used to be able to get with certain sales effectiveness tools were plug and play, but now it takes a little bit more emotional intelligence to connect them all together and run through this entire buyer's journey as we get smarter and better at this as a whole. So how do you help break this down for people? So we sort of identified it, the 60,000 foot view. Where do we take it from here?
Well, there's obviously a lot of different ways to tackle this challenge depending upon the size of the organization and the complexity within the stack itself. But what I find to be very useful, whether Dial Source is working on deployments for Fortune 100 or we're working with 50-person sales organizations. Oftentimes, I think identifying what are the sales and service reps supposed to actually be doing. Roll up your sleeves as the executive, the manager, and get in the trenches. Go to war with the soldiers, so to speak, and understand what is our reps trying to accomplish throughout their day in order to hit the metrics that have been defined by management. And what are the systems and the fractures and the processes that are preventing the reps from being as productive as they need to be? And we have some powerful statistics, whether it's our friends at Salesforce, whether it's our friends at Forbes, just about how much time reps have to spend in order to kind of hit those basic numbers. And I think that's a good area to start, because it allows us to kind of uncover the inefficiencies within the organization, which are generally fractures across those systems. And if we can understand what those problems are first, then we have a very good shot of taking a step back and starting to ask actionable and intelligent questions on how can we increase the output of the sales and service rep while reducing the time and energy in doing other unrelated activities.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. So where do you go from there? Where do you sort of manage through that piece, right? Which metric do you start with might be the best question.
I think it's important to start asking the questions, and rolling up the sleeves is often where people get stuck. And so I'm often not as concerned with what are the first questions being asked, but that questions are being asked. Because once we have answers, we're going to change the next iteration of questions. Something along the lines like, how much of the day is the rep spending prospecting? You know, we see oftentimes where sales leaders and even the best sales reps are so focused on things like, how many calls did I make today? But I don't believe that dials equal dollars. I don't believe the smile and dial era is relevant these days. I believe that conversations create relationships, and relationships build and service revenue opportunities. They close customer cases. They help the buyer journey and the customer experience. And so I believe there are many methods and metrics to start looking at. If we're talking about, let's say, sales for making and receiving phone calls, like how many times did I have a conversation with Richard, and how long did I speak to him before he indicated interest in a particular product or service? And using that data to then automate the labor-intensive processes that prevent the rep from getting onto that next conversation, managing that next relationship. So in that type of process, I think starting in what's preventing the reps from doing what they need to do is a initial point that allows us to start asking intelligent questions and start deriving actionable intelligence from there.
Yeah, and I love your point of, hey, at some point you just start, right? But you know, let's say you're coaching. You know, we got lots of people dialing in on this thing, right? That are listening in. Where are some places they should start? Where do you see people in places that they should start? I want to try and give people a couple of metrics, and by all means, you know, for the crowd, you know, if you've got questions around, well, here are all the things I'm measuring, where should I start to become more effective with this? You know, ask that question. I'm sure Josh will be glad to give you his opinion on where you want to go.
Yeah, if we're looking at things like for sales related functions, where a BDR or an account executive has to make outbound calls to the leads or contacts and accounts with new or related revenue opportunities, I think that's where it really comes down, and is very important to look beyond the dials. And so whether it's some of the logos that we see on screen here that we've worked with that utilize our technology for making and receiving phone calls, each one of them in different verticals and in different segments have to ask themselves different questions. But we can start with things like, what are the benchmarks utilized in order to derive reps productivity? And somewhere to start is, generally we see these sales leaders managing, how many outbound calls did you make? How many emails did you send? But the metrics should go far beyond that to things like, how many times did Richard call us? When did we speak? What did we speak about? When I followed up with Richard, did that result in the activities being logged? So I think benchmarking beyond the dial and how we're interacting with customers and what we're talking to them is an area that will provide quite a lot of insight to where we want to whittle down, so to speak, in the process, the procedures, and the technology stack.
Yeah. So do you think that you should be spending time, how do you measure that from metrics to conversions, right? So are you literally talking, how do you go from dials, quantity to quality? Like, what are the things that define quality for you as you see this as best practice for Josh?
Yeah, the great question. And so I would look at things like, how many times did I have a touch point with a contact? How long did we speak before an opportunity stage was advanced, closed won, closed lost, or created for that matter? And based on metrics like that, then we can start focusing on the processes and the procedures and using the automation, whether it's in Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, or DialSource, that's facilitating those labor-intensive processes. One, saving the rep time and energy at the end of every single customer interaction, but also by logging all that right actions and activities across all the objects, on the account, on the contact, on the revenue opportunity, we're able to start looking in and what are our reps doing. Now, I believe generally that the top 1/3 of our sales teams are going to be producers. These guys and gals are just going to find a way to cut through the mess to hit their numbers. Where we can really benefit is by simplifying the technology stack and focusing on the automation and the analytics. We can take those learning lessons to help bring the bottom 1/3 and the middle 1/3 of the organization up in productivity. And by making sure that we're looking and tracking each of these customer interactions across all the right data points in CRM, that really helps us as executives and managers start to not only save our reps time and energy, but start to pull more meaningful data out of the customer interaction. Because I think we can all relate to the fact, even our best sales reps with the best intention, more often than not, are not logging all the right actions and all the right activities in all the right places in CRM. And so if the data is anything less than 100% accurate, then so will the outcome of the reporting and the associated strategy and intelligence. So we really want to focus on first simplifying what it is the reps are doing, and then how we can increase the output by using streamlined technologies within our CRM stack.
Yeah, and I'm going to drill down a little bit on that, right? Because you're talking about CRM engagement, which is critical. Like, we see it, this has been in existence since, Goldmine existed, and, Lotus Notes, this whole lack of putting data in the system. That is always a big problem, right? Anything that you've seen or used, or, and yes, you can talk about outsourced, right? But to increase the engagement of the CRM from the rep perspective, any things you can give people other than tell them, hey, just put more stuff in there? What other things have you seen to help improve that engagement?
It's really also kind of going back to the trenches and sitting down with the managers and the users and saying, how is the CRM configured? Is there a lot of extraneous information on the page layout? How I'm interacting? Oftentimes we see that over an organizational history and adoption of CRM, it's just adding more and adding more and adding more. And it's never really kind of like taken off, like whittled it down throughout the process. And so I think sitting down and understanding, what do the reps need? Is it accessible at each customer interaction, call, email, LinkedIn message, etc., will really help to provide the rep with only the right information at the right time. And by starting processes like that, then we can start to congruently configure our technology, streamline the user experience, and not only focus on the quality of life of our sales rep, but increase the quality of the buyer journey by having the right information at the right time.
So I'm hearing you talk about field creep. That's what I call it, right? Everybody keeps adding all this shit to the CRM system because marketing wants this, and so wants this, and so wants that. And, while we've moved into a all-encompassing role where sales, marketing, customer success needs data, you can't make sales reps get all the other kinds of data that's not specifically relevant to closing the deal. Even though it's valuable data, you got to have other ways for your other departments to, communicate with your customers and make that work. I have a really good question from Ty coming in that I want to ask that I think is great. Is that some of the biggest pain points around this isn't just sort of getting reps to do it, but it's change management, right? How do you overcome this change management with the tenured reps? Lots of things like, this is how we've always done it, or they love to play the what if game around, not based on data. Any experience you can shed the light on that one would be amazing.
Yeah, and it's something that we see all the time, that the tenured rep has continually met quota and does not want to change processes. And then you often see a pushback from management saying, this rep is continually over quota, I'm not going to change anything. But a dinosaur eventually goes extinct. You evolve and adapt, or you die. I can use a good example from one of our many professional sports teams at the Sacramento Kings many years ago, when they were talking about moving up to Seattle, and they were in an NBA lockout, and they had a lot of tenured reps there that were 50 years old, that have worked there 20 years, that didn't want to change by adopting Salesforce, adopting DialSource, and other things. I saw what happened in the pilot, where the users of DialSource in this example were outputting 3.5 to 4.5 times the manual processes. And as a result, that's extremely motivating to the individual saying, I don't want to adopt this, when they're seeing firsthand reps are increasing output by staggering amounts, 300-400%, and they're doing less work in order to achieve that, which has a direct correlation to the commissions of the reps. So when you actually facilitate and enable the right processes, procedures, and technology to increase the output, then your top reps will adopt that technology. I can think of another example where we did a couple thousand user deployment for ADP, and we did it in such a sophisticated and streamlined way that they were able to deploy out twice the amount of reps in half the time they expected. And you don't hear that. You don't hear technology adoption going faster, better, and smoother. It's always the opposite. And the way to do that is to really figure out what are the problems preventing the reps from earning their commissions, having a high quality of life in their day. And if you facilitate that and you demonstrate that, it builds trust. And so when the reps see that management is going to start actually building technology that's going to increase their output, instead of the opposite, which is the norm, then you wind up seeing those leaders saying, I have this problem, I have that problem, help me solve it.
Yeah, I think you said you've got to teach those reps, what's in it for me, the with them, right? You've got to teach that old school. I sort of call those people, the negative Nancys and the grumpy Gus's of the world who don't want to adopt and adapt. And that's okay. But when you show them the value of what's going to happen, it's then up to them to make a change. And sometimes, Ty, you have to have this conversation that says, look, we've shown you everything we can do. We hope that you can adopt to us. But here's what's going to happen, because if you don't adopt here, you're going to go join another organization, and you're going to have to change your process anyway. We'd rather you stay here and not lose the value that you bring to our organization. And oftentimes that'll help really affect that change management. Another question coming in from Carl, and then we'll sort of get back to sort of some of these other things we were talking about. But thoughts about delegating non-sales tasks to the office staff that are not in sales. I think the answer, Carl, and Carl, you may need to jump in there and sort of give us a couple of examples. But Josh, any thought about how do you get some of that stuff that's getting in the way of the sales rep out of their way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it also goes back to the slide we have up here from our good friends at Salesforce. And this sounds shocking until you think about it. And the normal reaction that I see when we're dealing with enterprise organizations is, it's probably more like 80% of the rep's day is spent in non-selling activities. And so this kind of like weaves this all together where if the executives have the transparency to say, this is our intent in reducing problems like this, and this is the way in which we're going to go about it, and here are the organizations that have demonstrated success with this combination of technologies like Salesforce and DialSource and other things like that, then we start to see that it helps reduce the non-sales related activities away from the reps where they can spend the time. Now, of course, we've had this challenge even within DialSource, but we've also had to build out a sales operations department within our organization to help make sure that the entire technology stack, even our own, is appropriately configured. And I think one of the critical mistakes that's often made is that people set it and forget it. But the better way to look at the technology stack, in my humble opinion, is a living, breathing organism that needs attention and care to make sure that it doesn't just attrition out and die. I mean, you wouldn't drive your car and never put oil in it or take it in for service, but that seems to be what we see so often, is that these organizations don't maintain their CRM and their stack, and those problems spiral out of control, which then at scale cause this 68% number to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Josh. Thank you. I think, Carl, to your point, one of the things that I hate seeing is I hate it when companies say SDRs need to go find their own sources, right? Like even when you give an SDR, Zoom info or another data source, to make them actually go and do the scraping and getting that data into Salesforce is not what you hired an SDR to do. Right? You hired them to make phone calls and to connect with people, not do data entry. So Carl, to your point, yes, there are many things I think you can offload, and offloading can create other challenges that you're going to have to manage through. But again, it's our job as leaders and sales leaders and executives to get things out of the rep's way that prevent them from doing the one thing we want them to do, which is talk to more people. So anything that prevents that needs to get out of their way as best you can, right? Whether that's at the front end of data, whether it's the back end of plugging in unnecessary data. So going forward from there, right? Like we've talked about this problem. We talk a little bit about the metrics. Talk to me a little bit more about fractured systems, right? Tell me what you mean by that fractured system, Josh. So he's on mute. Josh, hold on.
Sorry about that. Yes, thank you very much.
No worries.
So yeah, the fractured system has definitely been a challenging issue. And what we really mean by this is whether it's I have Salesforce or Microsoft as my CRM, and then I have these various integrations. And in my humble opinion, the worst type of these integrations are those kind of like standalone web portals. You've got to go from Salesforce, then you've got to log into another web portal, and it's got to pull some of the data into Salesforce to mimic the look and feel of another web portal. The rep has to interact a little bit over there. Then they have to jump back into the CRM and interact and log the activities. And the net is the rep's not going to do it, because the rep managing their own time is going to say the opportunity cost of time to me, the sales rep, is get on the call, get on the next email, make that conversation, and drive product. But the systems wind up getting in the way as a result of this. And so we have a slide that comes up here in a little while where we have a little infographic on it, where you've got CRM, and you've got your calling system and email and marketing automation, and all of these systems for the most part integrate together and talk together. And as a result, it's very, very easy to cause a fracture within the system where data doesn't flow accurately, truly, 100% of the time.
That's great. That's really, really great. So where would you want to go from here? Like, what do we want to explain to everybody else? I'm going to sort of step back from asking questions and let you sort of pick up with the flow of this conversation.
Sure. Well, as we talked about problems, then the flip side of the coin is clearly how do we get to a solution to this? And so I really think that the forward trend of technology in CRM and related applications is to focus on the sales rep, not to focus on the manager or the executive. And I really think that's where it has been. Give the managers the reports they need in order to make intelligent decisions, but that creates the fractured system. So I think what we see is adopting technologies that are native. That's a big component. And it's a word that's confused and it's used in marketing, but...
Yeah, what do you mean by native? Yeah, explain that in your context.
Yeah, and you see it all the time. In our definition of it, native is built in the programming language of the CRM. You look at DialSource, we're native top to bottom for Salesforce and for Microsoft. And so we're not only built in their programming languages, but the whole user experience is in the CRM itself. They're not jumping to dialsource.com. In fact, there is no dialsource.com. It's just our website. And so having a native application allows the rep to use the expensive CRM that the managers, the executives, and the owners have acquired. And this allows them to focus on building these concentric circles where everything sits on top of each other and data flows in real time in a secure manner, instead of these horizontal stacks where data has to leap from system to system, causing these breaks in reporting, the breaks in usage, and ultimately preventing the rep from being extremely productive.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think this is the piece. If you can walk by your sales team and you see that they have more than 7 tabs open, that's when you need to go native, right? Like we're trying to prevent this. All right, there you go. I was wondering if you were a one-tab leader, right? Like that's how you know if there can be as effectively efficient as possible within one tab. So it's almost like zero inbox, right? It's the same mentality.
Yes, and to your point, I'm here in Chicago today, and I'm meeting with Salesforce for top applications, and this has been the talk track for the top 20, 30 applications within the ecosystem on enterprise level. And whether it's a large enterprise account that we're working on later this week, who's in the Fortune 50, their goal is to have one pane of glass. They want to have 5 tools, CRM being one of them. They want a single user interface that's clearly laid out across this global organization so that they're providing a very streamlined user experience and user interface, and they're not over cluttering tools. And so, of course, that takes a lot of planning to do, but they're not looking at this as a fix. They're looking at this as a solution to provide a better quality experience to the sales and service rep, which will have a direct correlation in the product sold and serviced and the reporting derived from it, and the processes and procedures that will be streamlined as a result of it.
That's great. I love your phrase of a single pane of glass, which makes me go, does that mean everybody's only allowed to have one monitor now? Like, are you going back down to one monitor for sales reps?
No, we have 2 or 3, but I might have CRM on my main screen, and on the secondary screen, I have Slack, and that's communication, or have LinkedIn up for in messages and things like that. But those are not real-time things that interact during the customer interaction or buying journey, like a conversation within the data in the CRM of the opportunity.
Great. I'm glad I brought that up because I think my head was confused. Well, how many? Because then you definitely are having more than one tab open, but you're having it open in, you have one CRM tab open, one communications platform open.
Well, I don't want to go too far off tangent, but there's a lot of problems with that, and that's a normal practice, many tabs. And it comes down to 2 fundamental reasons. Let's say you're using Salesforce, or even Dynamics for that matter. Every tab that you open puts extra stress on the database at Salesforce. More importantly, to the end user, it slowdowns their local terminal. If I have 15 tabs in my browser, my computer is going to run slow. And that's generally an issue. If my work experience is not good, then I can't produce good quality work. That's why you see things like Salesforce Lightning, where the tabs are nested in the browser, not the browser tabs themselves, because it makes it faster and easier to have all the right information on your screen for that customer interaction.
Got it. Okay, that's great. So, go ahead, Josh. Yeah,
is also a common thing that we see. It sounds innocent, but it has detrimental ramifications, and that's calling somebody who's on the DNC. Or I just called Richard because I had 15 tabs open, and I can't remember which one I clicked to call, and I'm just going to click to call it again. And then I'm bothering Richard because I just talked to you, and that's how DNC flags can be dealt with. And so, for example, having a single pane of glass that allows it to not only automate the right actions and activities, but prevent the wrong ones like that, help also to improve the quality of the sales rep and also the service provided to the customer. And as you can see, we've got another statistic from our good friends here at Salesforce, which show 92% of all customer interactions occur over the phone. Now, we have Zoom Info, and we use LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and we have all kinds of tools that we use here. But I can tell you, when we're going to close a 5, 6, or 7-figure ACV deal, there's conversations that are occurring on the phone. They're not going to always send an email or a LinkedIn message. And the way I often relate this is, think if you have a serious problem at the moment. Are you going to call your spouse, email your spouse, or send them a LinkedIn message? You're going to call your spouse.
Depends on the problem. So, if I really want a response, but that's a whole other webinar that I don't think we'll go through today, Josh. But I love your analogy on that. So talk to me more about building this connected system, right? So how do we do that now that we understand your solutions to this challenge?
Yeah, so if we look at dial source, that enables an organization to make and receive their phone calls within the CRM and capture the analytics of what did we talk about, how long are we speaking, and then automate and log those activities. We're looking at this and saying, well, let's break it apart into twofold. There is the inbound calls and there are the outbound calls. And how do we bring this data together? And this is historically disparate systems. That is to say, Cisco does not, by default, connect into Salesforce or Microsoft, nor does it have any capabilities to pull this data in and automate these actions and these activities. So first, we want to start out with the pre-call analytics. Like, have we placed a call to Richard? Have we received a call from Richard? Did we have a conversation? How long did it last? And what were the outcomes related to that opportunity or case? We want to use those data points, which get created by the use of the system in the beginning, to start building sophisticated and native reports in the CRM. So, and I think everybody can relate to this. They probably have for their sales team, maybe a report or campaign in CRM like my contacts with a task due today and an open opportunity. But we want to build on that and say, in addition to all that, when was the last time we spoke to them? How long did we speak to them? Did the last conversation drive the revenue stage forward or backward? That can then be used in real-time reports within the CRM to help define the pre-calling. Then, of course, the really important component here is the quality of the telephony or the carrier network making and receiving the phone calls. And we all know what bad audio sounds like, and pops and dropped calls, and that is not what you want to have when you're talking to somebody about something technical with a lot of dollars associated. So the quality of the network is extremely important, so much so that we've spent 10 years just in building our own carrier-grade network for enterprise level. And the second component is, after the call happens, what is the rep supposed to do? Again, whether it's an inbound or an outbound call, adjust the stage of the opportunity, maybe create a task for the customer success manager to onboard that install and work with the client. That's where the post-call automation of Dial Source is going to really automate those actions and activities, saving me, the rep, time and energy, but also getting to the reports, logging all the right actions and activities on how long we're talking to people, related to what products. And by building this all natively within the CRM allows us to, again, save significant time and energy, but also to generate more meaningful data from every single type of customer interaction.
Let's talk for a second about how you build this native stuff, right? Like, you know, you're talking about, in one instance, it's fairly simple. How do I take my data from like 2 or 3 things in the stack and get it into CRM? But when you now have marketing and customer success and all these things, like, you know, for me, it feels like, well, some of this is a sales ops issue, not even a sales team issue, right? When do you recommend people start to look at this? Do they need to be at 0 to 3 million in revenue? They need to start looking and building this out? Is it, well, no, maybe not then. Maybe it's once you hit 5 to 10 million and then you can start doing operations? Because I've come to the conclusion that you need sales ops way sooner than most people think you do. And then to be able to do what you're talking about in this connected world and going native, you need a whole operations team to do that kind of stuff. What advice can you give to people, you know, as they look at their business and when they should start looking at this stuff?
I definitely agree with you that a sales ops is required within a business generally before people think it is. And we were guilty of that on our own through growing. However, where I do disagree with you is native technology is supposed to reduce the install time. It's supposed to reduce the effort in installing and configuring. The problem is it's about 100 times more difficult to engineer it. So from the Dial Source side,
right,
building it, it's much, much more difficult, which is why you don't see very many real native technologies within the CRM. But the flip side to the end user, whether it's the manager, the sales ops, or the account executive, that makes it easier for them to be able to just click a phone number, have a conversation, choose a call outcome, and then have the system automate everything. And the automation with Dial Source and CRM does not require programming. It's a visual interface. I can say at the end of this call, when somebody says I want a pilot of Dial Source, that can then automatically convert the lead into an account contact opportunity. It could then update the stage. It can record the conversation, embed the recording into the opportunity, so the managers can run simple reports natively, like, I want to see all conversations today that lasted greater than 5 minutes in length that had an opportunity stage either to demo set, interested, or pilot. And then that allows us to continually iterate. And yes, there's a different way to do it between 0 and 3 and 5 to 10 and 10 to 30 million, but it doesn't mean wait until you're $5 million to deal with this, because it'll make it even more difficult for the sales leaders to be able to make that next leap into that threshold.
Yeah, no, that's sort of what I was wondering. Based on your experience, right, just out of curiosity, if you had to go back and do it again, where would you have brought in your first sales ops person? At $1 million in revenue? Would it have been, now that you've had that pain?
Probably between 3 and 5. Probably close to $3 million.
Okay.
But it also, I don't think it's a binary answer in dollars, because it's also complexity of the product and the sales cycle. So if you're selling enterprise accounts and your deals are $1 million each, you don't need a sales ops person for 3 deals. If your widget is $50 and to get to that, you need to sell, thousands of widgets, then it's a more complicated process. So I think it's a balancing act of the complexity of the product and the sales cycle and the stage that then dictates where and when you make those shifts.
I completely agree. That's a great point to bring up, that if you're in a transactional world, it's going to happen way sooner. It's going to be based on how fast your transactions are going and how many there are versus the enterprise space. So now we've done this. Now where do you want to take us for the next part of this journey, Josh?
Well, I think that we can cover in on, or I should say, add color to how we go about simplifying the tech stack. And there was a great quote from my good friend who's the executive vice president of Madison Square Garden, who uses dial source for inbound and for outbound. And his quote, even here in Chicago a few weeks ago, was, "Don't let your people be the process holding your technology together." And that was a problem that the Garden had worked on for a long time. And he'll be the first to admit to anybody, and he did on stage, that even though they've gotten very good at it with tools like dial source, they're still always looking for ways in which to simplify the process and increase the output as a result. So again, it's that living, breathing organism that requires continual effort. And so it leads us to a type of question like, as we see on our screen, what would it mean to every person on this on this meeting if they were able to increase the sales output by 10%? I think it'd be a lot. If our clients told us they were increasing their output by 10%, I'd have a very fundamental problem. It's more like 100 to 150%, because it allows us to identify what is preventing the reps from being productive, those processes and procedures and broken systems, and streamline that away. And if we go back to our friends at the Garden, when they adopted dial source, in the first 7 days of deployment, they had a 27% increase in the amount of conversations to ticket holders with open revenue opportunities. That is not a statistic that they could easily pull between their Cisco phone systems, Microsoft Dynamics, across these systems that don't talk together. Not to mention the phone system didn't say how long a conversation related to an opportunity within Dynamics.
So, and in case people haven't figured that out, we're talking about Madison Square Garden, D-Garden, right? Which I think is absolutely fascinating. What was his? I mean, was he just in utter shock? Is he an early adopter who gets this, or the person that you're quoting, or is he just a guy who's constantly challenging himself to do better and better? Right? He's not necessarily breaking the system to fix it, but he's definitely looking for places that he can improve it.
It's both. And it really comes down to these 3 bullet points: people, process, and technology. And so he's constantly looking at the people within his organization to understand what are the problems they're facing. And in this case, the CRM admin was spending on average 90 minutes every time they had to pull a call report for the executive management on Friday afternoon. 90 minutes to pull a basic report. That was a problem in process and technology for his people. And as a result of that, understanding it, like we talked about in the beginning of our discussion here today, rolling your sleeves up and going to war in the trenches allows us to understand not only what is preventing the people in our organization from being productive, but understanding the organizational goals at the top to be able to shift these systems in and out to focus on the people, the process, and the technology.
I think
technology.
Yeah, you've got to sort of make it all connected, right? You've got to figure out what this puzzle piece is for you and start to break it down. But I do love your point of, that 90 minutes of preparing a simple report, right? I go back to my days of Sunday night preparing my Monday reports, right? That's what I'm doing on Sunday nights, which is a pain that every sales leader I know experiences. And the worst part is it's not so much the 90 minutes you spend, it's what could you have been doing with that 90 minutes. That's the real pain. That's the true opportunity cost is the $2 or $3 million that you can't get to because you're doing mundane, monotonous things that the system should be better at doing for you. Doesn't mean you're not going to have that. Yeah, totally. Just a total opportunity cost.
Yeah, opportunity cost of time is the most expensive of opportunity costs. We can generate more money, we can build more technology, we can hire more people. Even with all the sophisticated automation, it still can't create more time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So great. So this is your quote. Is this
Yes.
Is this how you sort of tell us what generated this for you? Like, where did this come from? What's your evolution?
Honestly, it's just something that I pulled out of one of my talk tracks of something that is constantly talked about and kind of adds color to the people, process, and the technology. I wouldn't categorize myself necessarily as a people person. I'm very tech driven. I keep my head down, so I want to make sure as an individual to constantly remind myself of the people. And the people are, as mentioned over and over again, what drives the organization, builds the technology. And so I often think it's lost on how the people in the organization feel and what is being done to increase their quality of life. And I see this when I roll up my sleeves with our VPs and go on site to large deployments like the one I mentioned earlier for tomorrow. And when I sit down with the people, and as CEO, when I come in and I sit down with the BDRs at the company and I'm working with them to understand it, that kind of makes them take a stand back and say, oh, wow, really? You're coming all the way to sit down with us and talk to us when our own leaders haven't done this. And I think that's often something that's overlooked. And it's probably just a requirement out of how we grew as an organization too. We didn't have sales ops early enough in our organization, so oftentimes those roles and responsibilities fell on myself and the other executives in the organization. And that created skills and strengths for us as sales leaders to be able to help not only deploy the technology, but to work with the people and the processes in these deployments.
That's great. I really appreciate you explaining the evolution of that. I think it's always fascinating to hear where people who've been successful, such as yourself, share the challenges you had go along the way, maybe some of the mistakes you've had, and then how you turned all of that into success. So what are the takeaways? Yeah, this is one of my favorite slides. What are the three takeaways we want to give to people for today?
Yeah, I think the ones that we've been hitting throughout the conversation is, first, we want to be able to identify what are the processes and procedures that are preventing the sales rep from not only achieving the goals set forth by the organization, but improving their quality of work and life as a result. Better systems, more automation, better analytics allows the sales rep to increase output with less time, energy, and effort. But then also, to the same point, sitting down and conveying from the leadership level to the newest, lowest BDR, why does this matter? Why is it important? Because we often see a disconnect in what the junior salespeople expect of them and what the organizational goals are at the executive level, and that's a process and people break, in my opinion. And so having the executives work intimately at each layer below them, and in many cases, several layers below them, helps us identify that. And then, of course, while that is all extremely important, if your tech stack is losing functionality because it's fractured, then none of it means anything, because then the reps don't have the right data, they don't have the right processes, they don't have the right procedures, and they're stuck trying to hold a broken system together while trying to realize their sales quota numbers, which is the whole point of them being there in the first place. So if we make these three things happen for an organization, then we wind up increasing the output, we wind up making it easier, and the consequences are not just, or the benefits, I should say, are not just increasing the output of the sales rep. But what we found internally, and I'll use my own sales team as an example, is the tenure of the sales rep is much higher. So we have a lot of millennials on our sales team. In many cases, we've hired them right out of school, University of California, Davis, Berkeley, and other schools. And we have people on our team that I hired right out of school that have been at DialSource 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And that's a crazy thing to think somebody out of a top school's first job is 3, 4, or 5 years. But it's because these three things are allowing these individuals to do better than their colleagues, make more money, have a job they're proud of, have a good quality experience in life, which makes them want to stay, which then, of course, another benefit is you're losing less money as an organization because, one, you're not attritioning out talent. And then the flip side is by having these three things put together with the automation, the analytics, is that when you do onboard new reps, the cost and time of onboarding is dramatically reduced because the people, the process, and the technology increases output and time of training.
That's great. I know you said earlier you don't consider yourself a people person, but if you're really that dialed in with your team and your organization, and maybe it's something you had to teach yourself, I think you're more of a people person than you might imagine. So hats off to you for at least making the efforts to support your team, because I work with a lot of startups and I don't get to see that level of ownership from the top down like you're doing, and I love it, and it's very meaningful. And to everybody listening, yes, there are actually good companies out there that do that.
That's one of the things that I spend most of my time working on a handful of very large enterprise accounts.
Right.
And when we did a big deployment with ADP last year and continued to grow them this year, this leaders came to me at ADP and said, when I walked into the room on multiple occasions, they got great feedback from the reps because they knew when I showed up with the aces, that stuff was going to get done. And after we had set a precedence 4 or 5 times, they knew stuff was going to get done at an increased rate. So it's something that's not only important within our organization to build a good organization, but it also allows us to provide a different quality experience to our clients that they're not used to.
No, I think this is great. I love you sharing all that and sharing how you built that. Again, maybe some people don't know who DialSource is. Tell people what DialSource does. And look, you've talked about some big companies. You've talked about ADP and The Garden and, these huge companies. Do people need to be big companies like that to benefit from DialSource? I don't want to scare people away. So please give everybody just a little bit of what you guys do. So if they're interested, they can come to you if they want help with it.
Yeah, and I could give a use case example, and this is what our sales team will be doing. So, for example, we have campaigns and reports in Salesforce that were built off Zoom Info and LinkedIn as an example. And then our account executives and BDRs and SDRs have to make and receive phone calls throughout their day. And what DialSource will do is automate presenting me the right record at the right time to place the call. I'm not picking the phone up. I'm not dialing anything. In fact, my phone is just a microphone. Everything happens inside of the CRM. And at the end of the customer interaction, I'm updating information in real time because it's native. And at the end of the customer interaction, I'm going to choose a call outcome that's configured by management in an infinite number of ways. And at the end of the customer interaction, DialSource is going to automate all those activities that could take me 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the call and then log them in all the right places. So it saves me significant time and energy at the end of every customer interaction. And it also creates very detailed reporting that cannot be created by any other type of system. That's on the outbound side as a simple use case. Another one could be perhaps I want to have the autonomy to build my own campaigns or queues or lists. That can all be done in Salesforce or Dynamics with DialSource. So I have the power and the autonomy to determine who I want to go after, but still benefit from the automation, time savings for me, and the reporting for management at the end of the interaction. Then there's the inbound side of things, and this is very different with our technology. So, for example, if Richard was to call into DialSource and we didn't use our technology, which we clearly do, you'd hit the IVR, the phone tree, and you'd have to press 1 or 2 or 3. And then I pick up the phone, I say, "Hi, this is Josh. Who are you?" And you say, "It's Richard." And I look you up in Salesforce. And I say, "What can I do for you, Richard?" That's a blind connection. With DialSource, if Richard was a contact at the account, sales hacker, an inbound call, DialSource in real time would say, "We recognize this phone number that belongs to Richard, the contact at the account with an open opportunity. I own it. I'm logged in, I'm not on an active call, and I see on the left-hand side Richard's name pop up, and then as soon as I answer the phone, up comes your contact, your opportunity. I get all the right information. So this means that it's flattening the time and energy for me, the rep, and it's also improving the customer journey because you're not spending 3, 4, 5 minutes entering in information on the phone to then get a live person to say, this is who I am, this is what I need, please help me with this. And so
Yeah,
in a nutshell, you think of Dial Source as a communication system within CRM to allow reps to make and receive their phone calls, capture very important analytical data that's customized by management, and use automation natively within the CRM to increase output. And to your question earlier, what's the size of organizations? Yes, we have a lot of enterprise organizations. That's my primary focus. But we have verticals and we have different sized accounts we're going into. I would say if you have more than a 5-person sales team, and that could be a mix of BDRs and account executives, Dial Source is a great solution for that size of account because it allows the increase in output and efficiency while creating more intimate reporting. And it's going to increase the efficiency dramatically. And like we talked about earlier, being a native application means it's ironically faster and easier to install and manage than the vast majority of the tools that create the fractured infrastructure of those integrations.
No, and I agree. I want to say the one thing that you are leaving out on, whether it's intentional, is that it's all about the customer experience. Right?
Yes,
I can call into Delta. Delta is my favorite place to call into because they recognize my phone number. They ask me one question. They put me through and they go, hey, Richard, are you calling about your trip over to Dublin today, or is there something else I can help with? Versus when I call Comcast and I got to explain for the 16th time that my internet speed is slow, right? Like those are two disparate things. And one enterprise is crushing it and one enterprise is crushing me. And, I can't stand it. And the fact that you can do that from 5 reps up to 5,000 reps or however big your center is amazing.
Much more revenue. Your LTV of your customers is going to increase. You're not going to have people churn. So Josh, thank you so much for sharing your experience, but sharing what it is you guys do. So
my pleasure.
With that, I want to say thank you to everybody. Josh, thank you so much for your time. I know Josh has a whole team behind him who helped put this deck together, work on the messaging for everyone. I want to thank their team over at Dial Source. Thank everybody who attended the webinar for paying attention and letting us do stuff. And, I know we didn't get to some questions along the way, particularly Carl. Carl, you sent me about 30 questions, but I just couldn't get to all 30 of them or we'd never get through this webinar, so I apologize. But thank you so much, Josh, for having us, and thanks again to the Dial Source team.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you, everybody, for their attendance. It's been a pleasure.
All right. I think we lost you on sound there, but I think you're saying goodbye.
Yep.
So we'll talk to you again. All right.
Thanks. Bye.